My name is Darci Graves, and I'm speaking today on my presentation on A Patient of Privilege Speaks Up and Asks the Question, What If? There's been a couple of mentions of privilege and inequity and inequality throughout the conference, which was exciting to see because when I submitted this abstract and as I was looking at who was all going to be here, I kind of had that, does anybody else remember the song, One of These Things is Not Like the Other, One of These Things doesn't belong? Okay, so we have a little bit of that. Because I am not a technology person, I used to teach at a medical school, but I have no clinical background. I used to teach communications, diversity, spirituality, and the geriatrics curriculum, or everything that I called everything that the medical students loved to hate, the things that they didn't at the time think applied to real medicine. But I'm very excited to be here today and be talking about, in part, my experience with the healthcare system and as a patient with privilege. The kind of overarching umbrella for this session is called inclusion and removing barriers. And I think really what I want to say is for the takeaway points is that privilege is a facilitator and that not having privilege is the barrier. And we can't change that privilege exists, because it does, but we can increase that awareness. We can be thinking about issues of accessibility. We can be thinking about ways that we can increase our interaction. There we go. So this is me. So on any given day, I identify as a social advocate, an overeducated but not always smart, lifelong student, a cancer survivor, a lover of art, a human to my dog, Ella Jane, a photographer, mentor, satirist, sister, daughter, niece, aunt, friend, and hopeful humanitarian. Almost a year ago, I didn't know it at the time, but I became an e-patient. And I'll talk a little bit about that and my dual citizenship and my role as patient, but also as educator. And this dual citizenship is kind of how I was able to navigate my journey through breast cancer. How my two worlds overlapped, I'll be talking today some people might describe my journey through breast cancer as a lot of dumb luck. Sometimes it was, well, you did it. It was your self-determination. It was your ability to navigate the system. And I argue that it was some of each of those things, but it was mostly because I had knowledge of the system and I had the courage to be assertive and the permission to be assertive and not have someone question that assertiveness and interpret it as being bitchy or uncooperative or unresponsive, because I was able to interact with them and speak the language and really work with my healthcare team and my healthcare providers. But it all comes down to privilege and how having that privilege and being part of the system gives us that opportunity to interact. Yesterday we heard from Aaron and that panel about working with the underserved. I am not among the underserved. I am among the well-served. But during my experience, I found a number of times where my healthcare, had I not been who I am, could have been easily derailed. I could have had a completely different experience. But I am among the well-served. I have insurance. I have a job that let me take short-term disability so I could focus on getting well. I had my choice of doctors. I live in the Baltimore, D.C. area. I could go to Hopkins or Georgetown and have those kinds of doctors at my disposal. Now, when we talk about privilege, there's a lot of people who go, wait a minute, that's a hot topic. Earlier in August, there was a BuzzFeed, and everybody who's familiar with BuzzFeed knows it's a bunch of goofy images with some taglines. It's not anything really threatening. So I tweet this BuzzFeed article about examples of white privilege, and I get this reply tweet saying, examples of white ignorance, being brainwashed into thinking that white privilege exists. Well, first of all, if anyone thinks out there that there's some sort of conspiracy to make people think that white privilege exists, that's just silliness. I did not engage this gentleman in a teaching moment or a teaching opportunity because I didn't want to go down that road. If I had, I probably would have just pointed out that this was number 12 on the list. If you've never thought about privilege, that means you're privileged, because you were able to interact and move within the world without having to think about those pieces. Yesterday during the keynote, we talked about mindsight and how trust and communication and interaction impacts us on the sociological and biological level. Well, imagine what distrust, miscommunication, and isolation can do to us on a sociological and biological level. Talking about privilege is not about blame or blaming. You know, there's been a lot of things when you talk about white privilege or you talk about privilege in general, people go, well, I worked really hard. Or my parents, immigrated here from England and they had to fight and da-da-da-da-da. It's not about blame or blaming. It may simply mean, and this is for the gentleman in the room, it may simply mean that you walked home alone at night and you didn't think twice about it. I can guarantee that all of the women in this room have thought twice about, is this a safe place for me to walk home? Because we don't, we have to think about, what am I wearing? Where am I walking? How is this going to be interpreted? If something happens to me, can I be blamed for it? It does not mean that you did not work hard. It just may simply mean that you had more doors open to you. It may mean that you don't get pulled over simply for being the wrong color in the wrong neighborhood. It may mean that you didn't get followed in a store. It may mean that you didn't get blamed for something, because of the way that you were dressed. Privilege isn't about pointing fingers. We just need to be aware that our privilege exists, ask questions about our privilege, and do good with our privilege. So this is that part where I start to talk about my own health journey and what the role of my privilege played in that. So this journey is relatively recent for me. This all happens within almost the last calendar year. Last August 16th, 2013, I went to my OBGYN to confirm that there was a lump in my right breast. I knew it was a lump, but I was like, it's time to talk to the doctor about, what this lump is. I have a strong family history of breast cancer and ovarian cancer. People say that cancer runs in my family, breast cancer gallops through mine. My mom, 2 aunts, at least 3 second cousins, all have been diagnosed with breast cancer, and all premenopausal. So I go and I have this lump examined, and I leave my doctor's office. She goes, gut reaction, I think it's a fibroid adenoma. I don't think you really need to worry about it, but given your family history, let's get a diagnostic mammogram. And I say, okay, because I'm all about getting the tests and making sure that I have the information and that we've crossed things off the list. So I call the people who have done my mammograms historically, because I've had mammograms done before, and everybody wants to be able to compare everything. And it's August 16th, and I call the one that's close to my office, because it's, office and home, because it's convenient. And they say the first time they can see me to do a diagnostic mammogram is September 24th. And I say, so this is the first moment where I have to be assertive, because I could just as easily say, okay, September 24th, that sounds great. I'll put it down in my book. I say, no, that's not going to work for me. We need to be seen this calendar month. He looks around at the different offices, and they find an office that's able to see me on August 20th. So I say, I'm going to take that appointment. But this office requires me to drive 45 minutes out of my way. I'm in the Baltimore, D.C. area. I had to drive way out into Virginia to be seen at this office. But I get there, and I'm able to do it because I have the vacation time. I have the understanding employer. I have a car. I'm able to get there and do these things. But now there are 35 days between door 1 and door 2. And that number will come in a moment. So I go in and I have my diagnostic mammogram, and they do the ultrasound, and I'm laying there on the table with the gown, and they're doing the ultrasound. I don't know why this woman is standing up, because I don't think they really do the ultrasound standing up, but that was the only graphic I could find. And the radiologist says, yeah, I think your gynecologist was right. I think it's a fibroid adenoma, so we can monitor it, or we could choose to biopsy it. And I say, and in my head I'm going, this gentleman has obviously not read my medical chart. And I say, well, in my cheapest, little voice, well, based on my family history, if there's an inclination to biopsy it, why don't we go ahead and do that? Family history? Tell me more about the family history. So I tell him the spiel. And he goes, yeah, well, let's go ahead and schedule a biopsy. And I say, how about we look at today's schedule? Well, I can't guarantee you today's schedule. I said, I understand that, but let's just go ahead and look. And within 45 minutes, I was having my biopsy. And 2 days later, so now I've had and then you have to go have a second mammogram after they've done the biopsy. But 2 days later is when I'm diagnosed with breast cancer. They get me in for surgery based on what they've figured out so far on September 13th. That's how quickly they're trying to move me through the system. But as a reminder, September 24th is the day that my original diagnostic mammogram was due. So this is how quickly now that they have test results, and now that they have information, and now that I have pushed and said, no, really, I need to have a diagnostic mammogram before September 24th. No, really, we need to do the biopsy. No, really, we could do the biopsy today, I'm pretty sure. We're still 11 days away from when I could have been starting this process. So what does this all potentially matter? Well, I was diagnosed with invasive ductal carcinoma, triple negative breast cancer, which is a highly aggressive form of breast cancer that strikes people in their younger ages. As it turns out, I was stage 1. When they did all the ultrasounds and everything, they thought I was stage 2. Tumor grade was 3, which is the scary, bad kind of tumor grade. But the number that really caught my attention was my Ki-67, and in a nutshell, that's your proliferation score. That's how quickly the cells are regenerating within your body. So here's low, borderline, and high. I was in the 90th percentile. So as it turns out, I had really overachieving breast cancer, which was not a surprise to any of my friends. I want to make sure I'm conscious on time. But privilege does not have to be doesn't have to be something positive. It can simply be the lack of something negative. This is an ad campaign that came out of the UK. One of my privileges was that I was diagnosed with breast cancer, because my disease, my diagnosis, comes with corporate sponsorship. There isn't something, I can get anything pink with a ribbon on it that I could possibly find. I could go on Amazon, I could look for whatever, but that's not the case for all diseases. We can see that with ALS. Another opportunity for when my care could have derailed was when I went to go in and get my MRI. For those of you who don't know, this is, and I'm assuming this is typical, but it may not be. This is how a breast MRI goes. You lay down face first. These two places are just what you imagine them to be for. You lay your girls down, and you put your face in the little massage like cursor. When I opened my eyes, when I looked down, they had Xeroxed copied. I guess this is to help you find your happy place. They had Xeroxed pictures of 3 little white babies. That was their happy spot. Now, the county I lived in was primarily African American. I'm in there for breast cancer. Chances are when I go through chemotherapy, kids may or may not be in my future. So you have another opportunity to potentially derail your experience. Privilege buys options. Privilege lets you die at home if that's what you want. Privilege brings health care to you. So just in the last couple of minutes, when you're thinking about the system, when you're thinking about how things fit together, when you're thinking about accessibility, when you're thinking about where this information comes from, figure out, keep in mind the aspects of privilege. Just being yourself doesn't necessarily get you the entree if you don't fit within the system that's being set up. Having privilege means you don't have to worry about how you are shown in the public eye. You don't have to think about whether you have to, potentially get shot on the way home, or whether The Economist is going to publish and this just happened yesterday, The Economist published a book review by someone who said that slavery wasn't all that bad, and in fact, it was good for the economy. They've since retracted it. But this happened yesterday. Privilege lets you see the world and interact in the world in a very special way so that you don't have to think about what your role is and how you interact with it. Citizenship, sexual orientation, gender, accountability, accessibility, ability, all of these things, all have a way of impacting and informing your privilege. One of the privileges I have is being able to be here today and being able to share this part of this story. I actually crowdsourced my registration fee because I had been paying off doctor bills and I needed to move and I had some of these other things. So I auctioned off font sizes. These are some of my sponsors. And here is some information, and I talked over a little bit, so I only have 1 minute for Q&A, but I'll stick around afterwards if people are so inclined, and I want to make sure that I hand things over to Ben.
Wonderful.
Thank you.